Virgin Most Powerful Radio, sharing the gospel with clarity and charity.
And now, Virgin Most Powerful Radio is pleased to present Hands-On Apologetics with renowned Catholic author and apologist Gary Michuta.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. Yes, it's time for Apologetics. Yes, you have entered into the Virgin Most Powerful's Apologetics Dojo. I am your host, Gary Michuta, and we are going to talk about explaining, defending the faith with clarity, charity, and confidence. And great show in store for you today. Hope everybody's doing well. One of the fun things about doing this broadcast is that it gives me an opportunity to talk to old friends. In fact, yesterday we talked with William Albrecht. I've known him for a number of years. Great guy, great research, and it's just great to mix it up, have him back in the dojo. Well, I also get a chance to make new friends and talk to new friends. And so the guest for today is a new friend of mine. His name is Bryan Gesinger. And he wrote a book called Power to Become Children of God. And I can't wait to talk to Bryan, because I think Bryan, his perspective is a lot like mine. His background's similar to mine as well. And we're going to be talking all sorts of different apologetic angles, tactics, things like that. It's going to be a lot of fun. We're also going to have our normal sessions of finding the fallacy. Today's fallacy, by the way, is two wrongs do not make a right fallacy. It's one of those fallacies that the name pretty much says it all. And the Meet the Early Church Father for today is Pope St. Innocent I, one of the most important and probably, perhaps one of the best popes in history. So we're going to talk a little bit about him. And as always, you are part of the program. So if you want to join us, give us a call at 888-526-2151. It's 888-526-2151. Or if you want to just email your questions in, you can email it at questions@handsonapologetics.com. Hands-On Apologetics is one of my two websites, and on there, by the way, you can see all the programs and links and all sorts of stuff. But just email questions at handsonapologetics.com. Your email will fly through the internet and land in the virtual mailbox of the dojo. So I do see everything. Occasionally it sometimes gets on the air, and often we have really good broadcasts when we're dealing with questions. So not only if you have questions, but maybe you're in a situation where it's you're encountering some anti-Catholicism. Maybe you're having family troubles in that regard. Let us know, and we can always bat it around and see. Maybe we can come up with some great ideas of how to bring Christ to the situation and clear up things through apologetics. So it's time to give, as always, a shout out to all my good friends watching on live stream on Facebook and YouTube. Hello, everybody. It's great to see you. I love giving the shout outs because I have the YouTube stream here streaming while I'm on the air, and it's usually just a huge explosion of emojis. Yeah, hi, everybody. So it's good to see familiar names. And also, I need your help. When it comes to social media, I'm pretty antisocial. I really don't understand using social media. I try my best, but the learning curve, I'd rather put the energy towards research and things like that rather than forgetting how to work a social media site. But anyway, there is a Facebook event page now for breaking the Bible barrier. I'm going to be coming out west. The dojo is traveling out west to Govina, California. And I'm going to deliver a talk. I'm actually going to be in studio that entire week, or actually, I shouldn't say entire week, Monday through Wednesday. I'll be in studio, and I'm going to give a talk, Breaking the Bible Barrier. And there was an event page that was created on Facebook, which I have no idea how it works. That's really more my wife's domain than my own domain. So if anybody out there, if you enjoyed the program and you're pretty psyched up that to hear the talk in Covina. If you could somehow let people know about the event, you could do it outside of the event page, but just pass along. Do whatever Facebook people do with events, and I appreciate it. And by the way, the talk, which is on February 20th, it's going to be unlike a lot of my other talks. It's geared really for Catholics. I'm going to kind of teach Catholics how to share Scripture in a way that Protestants will understand and in a way that is very effective. Okay? And some people asked, should I bring my non-Catholic friends to this event? Would they like it? And this is one of my few talks where I would actually say no. It's really more geared towards to a Catholic audience, because I've had non-Catholics attend and they just get completely lost. And the reason for it is, well, think about it. If you traveled to France and you attended classes given to French people on how to speak English, it would not make a lot of sense. So it's kind of like that. The dojo is going to come to the Sacred Heart Chapel. We're going to dive into Scripture and specifically like why so many Catholic arguments fail, and how to share it in a way that's effective, that we could communicate to our separated brothers and sisters. So I think it's really more geared towards Catholics. So just FYI. And by the way, if you're in Southern California, I'd love to see you. All right, so enough of that. Let's jump into our exercises, shall we? All right, well, finding a fallacy for today is 2 wrongs do not make a right. And this particular fallacy occurs when somebody tries to justify an action against another person by appealing to the other person's actions. I guess that would say. How can I say that clear? That was really muddled. For example, if someone does something wrong, obviously you can't appeal to something else that's wrong, because 2 wrongs, don't make a right. We know the saying, but actually it's kind of a fallacy as well. You can't justify something that's wrong by pointing out something that's more wrong. This occurs a lot in apologetics. For example, if and by the way, on all different sides, not just non-Catholic versus Catholic, it's also Catholic versus non-Catholics. For example, somebody might say, well, what about the Inquisition? And then the Catholic may respond, well, what about Protestant persecution of Catholics? Well, 2 wrongs don't make a right. It's not like they negate each other. It's 2 separate problems that have to be worked out in their own way. One doesn't negate another. So that is the 2 wrongs don't make a right fallacy. That's one of those fallacies that seems kind of so obvious that it's hardly even worth mentioning. But we do mention it. Why? Because that's how we rock in the dojo, right? All right, so let's jump to our Meet the Early Church Fathers for today. And the early church father is Pope St. Innocent I, who reigned between 401 to 417 AD. Now, nearly all catalogs, or nearly all scholars, place the pontificate of Pope St. Innocent I as beginning on December 20th, 401 AD. Prosper of Aquitaine, however, also would put it around 402. So we're pretty sure when the pontificate began. Innocent died on March 12th, 417. And like I said, he must be reckoned among some of the greatest popes in church history. He was particularly important in respect to solidifying the concept of the Roman primacy. But it doesn't start with him, obviously. The Roman primacy starts way before that. And actually, when we bring our guest on, we'll be talking a little bit about that. During the sack of Rome in 410 AD, Innocent took refuge for a short time in Rivington, and perhaps the most important single act of Innocent's pontificate was his condemnation of Pelagianism. So, that is really, as far as doctrine is concerned, one of his greatest claims to fame. He rejects Pelagianism, and in his letter number 30 to the fathers at the Council of Milibus, he declares that these founders of novelties are to be deprived of ecclesiastical communion until they recover their senses. Yeah, you gotta love that, huh? It's refreshing to hear papal pronouncements like that, right? Deprived of ecclesiastical communion until they come to their senses. You know, another important thing about about Pope Saint Innocent I is that we have letters from him. That's most of his the material we have. In one letter, it's very interesting because he replies to a bishop in Gaul, actually to the whole bishops in Gaul, which is modern-day France. And it was asked to the Pope which books are to be accepted as canonical scripture. And Pope St. Innocent I, now remember, this is way back in the early 400s. He responds with a list of books. He says a short annotation shows that the books that are to be accepted as canonical, as you wish to be informed specifically, are as follows. And he starts with the books of Moses and Joshua, Judges, 4 Kingdoms, which is, of course, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings. Also Ruth, 16 books of the prophets, 5 of Solomon, the Psalter. And then he goes into the histories, which also include Tobit and Judith, 1st and 2nd Maccabees. And basically, he affirms as canonical scripture not only the proto-canonical books, but those 7 Old Testament books that Protestants and Jews do not have in their Bible. So, meet the early church father for today, Pope St. Innocent I. And coming up next, we have Bryan Gesinger. And it's going to talk about the power to become children of God. Don't want to miss it. Stay tuned, everybody.
If you're a listener to Virgin Most Powerful Radio, you already know about Hands-On Apologetics with Master Apologist Gary Michuta. And if you're a fan of Hands-On Apologetics, then we have some exciting news for you. This February, Sensei Gary will be leaving the Apologetics Dojo in Michigan to visit the Virgin Most Powerful Radio World Headquarters in Covina, California. And if you'll be in Southern California this February, we have more exciting news for you. Not only will Gary be doing his live show from our Virgin Most Powerful Radio studio, but he will be giving a live presentation on February 20th at 7 p.m. right here at the Sacred Heart Chapel. That's Gary Michuta speaking live on the topic of Breaking the Bible Barrier, Why Catholic Appeals to the Bible Fail, and How to Make Them Successful. For more information, call 877-526-2151 or visit virginmostpowerfulradio.org. It is only because of your continued prayers and generous donations that Virgin Most Powerful Radio can broadcast live each weekday. We count on your spiritual and financial support because you understand the urgent need for Catholic programming that shares the gospel with clarity and charity, but without compromise. Please prayerfully consider becoming a monthly donor. You can set it up with the touch of a button on our website, catholicrc.org.
Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show, and they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow! That's 80%! realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE-US1.
Now, back to Hands-On Apologetics with Gary Michuta. If you'd like to join the conversation, call 888-526-2151. Here's Gary.
Welcome back, everybody. All right. So, It's time for us to go to our guest segment. Our guest sensei for today is Bryan Gesinger, who's the author of Power to Be Children of God. He was born in Spokane, Washington, but lived in Bakersfield, California, continuously since 1987. He's brought up Catholic, so that's something that we have in common. We're apologists who are cradle Catholics, but study a lot of apologetics, and that's what he credits remaining in the Catholic Church. He has a wife, Jen, and a daughter, Emma. And he wrote a book called Power to Become Children of God, which is the culmination of 25 years of research and reflection on the Catholic faith. Bryan conducted much research for the present work over many years of discussing Catholicism with individuals and groups of diverse ages and educational backgrounds, theological persuasions, and personalities. Consequently, the book covers a wide range of topics of interest to Catholics and non-Catholics alike, like the history and role of the Bible, the real presence of Christ in the Holy Eucharist, sacrificial character of the Mass, communion of saints, intercessory prayer, veneration of statues and icons of our Lord and the saints, doctrine of justification, interreligious faith, and a whole bunch more. So, welcome to Hands-On Apologetics, Bryan Gesinger.
Well, thank you very much, Gary. I really appreciate this opportunity.
Oh, yeah. Now, did I pronounce the last name right?
I pronounce it Giesinger, yeah. It's been
good.
pronounced, I think, about 28 different ways throughout my life. So, but I pronounce it Giesinger. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, welcome to the club. Try. You would not believe how many different ways people pronounce Michuta.
Right.
Yeah, well, good.
Yeah.
You know, like I mentioned, we spoke through email, and I said, you know, once I learn a name wrong, it is so hard for me to get it right. So thank you. Thank you for coming on the show. You know, Bryan, we have a lot in common. I didn't realize how much we have in common. For example, both of us are cradle Catholics, which is kind of unusual for apologetics, isn't it?
It does seem to be the case. I know there are notable exceptions, but I know that in my own quest for self-education and studying the faith, I've learned an awful lot over the years from converts.
Yeah.
Because they especially seem to be motivated to learn the intellectual underpinnings, the nuances, the details, not only of the faith itself, but of the arguments for various doctrines of the faith. So they bring a great deal intellectually and spiritually to the church's patrimony.
Yeah, absolutely. But on the other hand, you know, it's such a great grace for those who are in the church. You know, I think a majority of the people listening to the program aren't converts. They're cradle Catholics like you and I. So, I mean, it's a great grace that they also get involved in the sharing, defending the faith.
Absolutely. And so many of us have had the experience that I had that precipitated my studying the faith seriously for the first time. And in my case, I attended both public and Catholic private schools growing up. But frankly, I didn't learn much in the way of the intellectual underpinnings and the history and the philosophy that over the last 2,000 years the church has developed and explained so well. Yeah. And so when I got to high school, and a very large public high school at that, I went from, as I describe it, a small pond to, as it were, being dropped headlong into the Pacific Ocean and being asked to fend for myself. And I was rather shocked when I began to hear all sorts of anti-Catholic charges that I had never heard before. And I had no way, no inkling of how to respond to such things. Right. And frankly, they were upsetting. At 15, I had no idea where these people had learned these accusations and assertions that they were making. And frankly, at the time, I wondered, maybe these people have a point. Maybe I just haven't been told the truth all these years, as few as they were, 15 or 16. Maybe I just haven't been let in on this. So I was rather upset, frankly, and shaken up. And I explained this to my mom, who herself is a convert, and I think understood pretty well. And she purchased several books for me. I remember I received those on Epiphany of 1993. And so one of those, there were several of them, but the main one that she gave me was Carl Keating's Catholicism and Fundamentalism, with which many of us are familiar and which has become a classic in the field. And quite honestly, reading that book, I had two distinct but related emotions. One, I thought to myself, this is incredible, amazing stuff. I've never even suspected that there was anything like this before. I'd never read anything even remotely comparable to it. That was number one. It was a shocking surprise. And number two, I thought to myself, why is it that at 15 or 16 then, had I never been told any of this, having grown up as a Catholic? And it was rather a cause of consternation, because I thought to myself, I should have been told some of this and not just left to fend for myself at 16 years of age. But in any case, I read that book over and over and over and over. I wore it out. And along the way, I began to obtain books that Mr. Keating suggested or had broached in his treatment. Incidentally, it might be interesting to point out and relevant that, as I discovered later, Mr. Keating, a lawyer by training, did not set out or sit down and write Catholicism and Fundamentalism chapter by chapter and in one cohesive book. He didn't set out, at least initially, to write a book. What he did was, like Cardinal Newman before him in the 19th century, he serialized the chapters that came to comprise Catholicism and Fundamentalism in a newspaper called The Wanderer. And at 15 or 16 years of age, I couldn't help wondering to myself, why is it that this book is written on such a high literary and intellectual level? Mm-hmm. Why is it so refined and so scholarly, as opposed to a merely popular approach? And then I realized it was because of the original audience for whom he wrote the chapters that ultimately comprised that book, which was the audience and the readership of the Wanderer newspaper. So I was reading that book that was written at the very least at a university level at 15 years of age. And so I was coming across references to Cardinal Newman and Hilaire Belloc and G.K. Chesterton and all of these great Catholic luminaries from previous centuries, even in the up to the 20th century. And that was the foundation of my pursuing greater studies and beginning to be able to discuss the Catholic faith with people who were very often highly learned in their own traditions, university educated, very often with advanced degrees. And to this day, I have none of that. I have over 25 years of studying on my own.
Yeah, right. You know, what's interesting is I had exactly the same experience, although it was a little bit later in life for me. is I grew up Catholic, and I went to Catholic grade school, Catholic high school. So I didn't experience public school. But, once I went into college, then it was, you enter into the fray and you encounter anti-Catholicism. At least for me, it was the first time where I've seen the occasional Jack Chick comic or something like that, but it wasn't until college that I was really confronted with anti-Catholicism. And it was Carl Keating's book, the same book as yours, that I remember reading it and thinking, what is this book? How come I'd never heard of this before? There's actual reasons why we believe what we believe. It's just strange that, I would go through Catholic education and, I never heard this approach to showing the foundations of the faith.
Exactly. And so many of us can relate and found ourselves in the same position. And thank God for Carl Keating and for Catholic Answers. And I really acknowledge a great debt to him in particular, because it was his book that spurred me to take the intellectual foundations of the Catholic faith very seriously.
Yeah, right. Now, you live in California, so were you able to visit with Carl or talk on the phone or anything like that?
I have spoken with him on the phone. As you probably know, he is no longer president of Catholic Answers as he was for so many years. But during his tenure as president, he appeared many times on the Apologetics radio show, Catholic Answers Live. And so I had the opportunity over the years to call in and ask questions and engage in conversation. So I was able once, albeit remotely, to tell him the great significance and the great role that his book, Catholicism and Fundamentalism, played in my own journey.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, same here. And I mean, it's God willing, when he goes to heaven, he's going to see all the great work that came through his ministry, and I know I credit his book with that was something that really opened my eyes and fell in love with apologetics. Well, we're coming up to the break. On the other side of the break, we're talking with Bryan Gesinger on his book, The Power to Be Children of God. And you don't want to miss it, folks. Stay tuned.
This is Terry Barber inviting you, all the men, to a men's conference June 15th at the Sacred Heart Chapel. This is going to be a day where we're going to talk about true masculinity. There's a problem in the Catholic Church today. We have very few men who love the Catholic faith. And I know a lot of the wives that I'm listening to right now saying, I want my husband to be on fire for the faith. Send him to the men's conference. Your son, send him to the men's conference by going to virginmostpowerfulradio.org or call 877-526-2151. That's June 15th. When your husband comes back from this conference, or your son, they're going to have a different view about their Catholic faith, because they're going to meet three men who love Jesus and his bride, the church, and are going to instill in them a love for Christ and his church, the Eucharist, Our Lady. Bring them to virginmostpowerfulradio.org. Sign up there or call 877-526-2151. Full sheen ahead.
It is only because of your continued prayers and generous donations that Virgin Most Powerful Radio can broadcast live each weekday. We count on your spiritual and financial support because you understand the urgent need for Catholic programming that shares the gospel with clarity and charity, but without compromise. Please prayerfully consider becoming a monthly donor. You can set it up with the touch of a button on our website, catholicrc.org.
Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show, and they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow, that's 80%. realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE-US1.
This is Jesse Romero. You're listening to Hands-On Apologetics with Gary Michuta on Virgin Most Powerful Radio.
You're listening to Hands-On Apologetics, and I am with my good friend, new friend, Bryan Gesinger, and we're talking about his book, Power to Become Children of God. Bryan was just sharing with us his how he kind of woke up from cradle Catholicism to discover apologetics through Carl Keating's ministry. Now, I think this is probably where our stories kind of diverge a little bit, because I formed my own ministry, but I think you started, was it contributing articles to various publications like Carl?
Well, I actually submitted some of my writing to the magazine formerly known as This Rock, which I believe now has been branded as Catholic Answers Magazine.
Okay.
And this is illustrative of my predicament in life, Gary. This will give you a great idea of where things stand for me and the trajectory of my writing career, because over time, what has happened very quickly, actually, is that the more I have fielded questions very frequently from complete strangers who discover me to be a Catholic, and we all know the drill, the sorts of questions that we get. I have fielded questions from individuals and groups who were more and more highly educated, more and more formally educated, with more advanced degrees, many of them pastors in ministry themselves. And so I've had to ratchet up my studies and my articulation and my responses to these sorts of inquiries and challenges. And so my writing has kept pace and has been commensurate with that ratcheting up of my studies. And so I've tried to strike a balance, which is sometimes difficult, but I've always sought to strike a balance between being approachable and clear and concise, and also being very careful about the scholarship and the intellectual challenges that are issued forth from men, usually who are very much more highly educated, formally speaking, than I am. So it's a very difficult balance to strike. And so to get back to Catholic Answers magazine, years and years ago, there was a dear lady who was editing This Rock magazine, and she was a very sweet soul. And I submitted a paper that now comprises a chapter in my book. This was an earlier draft of that chapter that now makes up, or that essay that makes up a chapter in my book. And she wrote back to me and said, "Bryan, thank you for submitting your work, but this is far too elevated, far too esoteric for our audience. You have to submit this to an academic journal if you hope to see it published." Now, that is a great compliment on the one hand, but on the other hand, I'm not an academic, and never have been and never will be. And so suffice to say that I found over the years that in my efforts to become as well educated and as well equipped and as well spoken as possible, in essence, I have shot myself in the foot in terms of getting my work published.
Yeah. No, I hear you. Yeah.
So the book is essentially the brainchild of my wife saying to me, in her great wisdom and love, Bryan, you have all these papers that you've written over 25 years. You look back and you see how much research you've done, and there's a very narrow market to get this type of work published. Why don't you put all these things together, send them to a publisher, which I did, and I sent it to Ignatius Press, and they were very, very highly complimentary, and they thanked me for my work, but Ignatius Press receives probably 8 billion submissions every 6 months.
Right.
So that's a bit of an exaggeration, but they're, let's just say, swamped with submissions. And so for me to have gotten high commendation from Ignatius Press, the editors at that estimable, revered publishing house, is, I think, real confirmation and validation of the work that I've undertaken over the years. So that was the impetus of my publishing those essays the way that I did on Amazon through their Kindle platform. And perhaps down the line, God willing, there may be a subsequent opportunity for me to see it published elsewhere, and we shall see.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you did, because it's funny. The media is like you contribute an article to a newspaper or a magazine. It's out there for maybe a month, if it's a monthly, or a few weeks, if it's a biweekly or something, and then it's gone. And all the work that you put into research and that, if someone didn't just so happen to be on that website or read that material, it's all that work kind of vanishes. So I'm really glad that you decided to put this in written form, book form, because then people have it as a resource. They can get to it any time they want.
Exactly, and thank you very much for that compliment and that support. I really appreciate it, Gary.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, well, you earned it, my friend. You earned it. Now, you cover a lot, actually, in this book. A real presence of the Eucharist, sacrificial character of the Mass, communion of saints, even having kind of a sketch of John Henry Cardinal Newman. I'm just curious, when you first started looking into apologetics, what was the one thing that you began with, like learning how to defend the faith? What was it that you gravitated towards?
Well, the main question for me, when I was initially, as I say, intellectually accosted about the Catholic faith, was this question of historicity and therefore of authority. And I remember being told, because really one can't separate the two. Either the Catholic Church is the church that Christ founded and is endowed with his authority by delegation, or it isn't. One or the other. There is no middle ground. And so that, to my mind, was the crux of the issue. All these other issues that people bring up are derivative. It's not that they're unimportant. Each one certainly is important. But in the final analysis, it's like in an analogous way, the authority of the U.S. government and the Constitution, let's say, of the United States. Either the United States is what it claims to be, and the foundations of the United States are legitimate, or not. Right. And we know, Lord knows, over the years, how many times that's been challenged and with awful results. And so that's a secular analogy to the legitimacy of the Catholic Church. What I was told when I was 15 was, by I think 16 and 17-year-olds, was that what purports to be the Catholic Church is really the illegitimate amalgamation of paganism with some sort of pseudo or crypto-Christian doctrine admixed to it. Yeah. And that at some point, which people hardly ever would specify when you pressed them on it, at some historical juncture, the Catholic Church morphed into what we know it to be today, from that pagan genesis, that pagan morass. And one of the few dates that people specified when you did press them on it, and you say, okay, when did this happen? Tell me. Because if you're going to make this charge, it's very, very important. It's a matter of justice that you tell me when this happened. And when they do, if they do manage to cite a date, often it was 313, and they said, well, it was the Edict of Milan, which was issued by Emperor Constantine. That's when the paganism and the theology were merged. Right. And so then you have an opportunity to test that, which I did, and which a lot of us have over the years, including Blessed Cardinal Newman when he was still an Anglican. And we can talk about that perhaps a bit later. But the point of that is that when you actually look at the historical record as we have it, and we have it extensively, deeply, and in a way that is profoundly impressive from antiquity, from the very beginning, you see that this charge that the Catholic Church is a byproduct and an artificial construct of paganism is just bunk, pure, unadulterated bunk.
Yes, absolutely. Well, to hear the music, we'll continue talking on the other side of the break.
If you're a listener to Virgin Most Powerful Radio, you already know about Hands-on Apologetics with Master Apologist Gary Michuta. And if you're a fan of Hands-on Apologetics, then we have some exciting news for you. This February, Sensei Gary will be leaving the Apologetics Dojo in Michigan to visit the Virgin Most Powerful Radio World Headquarters in Covina, California. And if you'll be in Southern California this February, we have more exciting news for you. Not only will Gary be doing his live show from our Virgin Most Powerful Radio studio, but he will be giving a live presentation on February 20th at 7 p.m. right here at the Sacred Heart Chapel. That's Gary Michuta speaking live on the topic of Breaking the Bible Barrier, Why Catholic Appeals to the Bible Fail, and How to Make Them Successful. For more information, call 877-526-2151 or visit virginmostpowerfulradio.org. It is only because of your continued prayers and generous donations that Virgin Most Powerful Radio can broadcast live each weekday. We count on your spiritual and financial support because you understand the urgent need for Catholic programming that shares the gospel with clarity and charity, but without compromise. Please prayerfully consider becoming a monthly donor. You can set it up with the touch of a button on our website, catholicrc.org.
Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show, and they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow, that's 80%. realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE-US1.
Now, back to Hands-On Apologetics with Gary Michuta. If you'd like to join the conversation, call 888-526-2151. Here's Gary.
And welcome back, everybody. We are chatting with Bryan Gesinger about his book, Power to Become Children of God, which is a bunch of essays that he put together over 25 years of research. In fact, you know, if you take a look at his book, I mean, boy, this is a solid work indeed. And, you know, Bryan, that's actually kind of a heady subject to dive into. I'm surprised that they actually gave you a date and some details. You know, usually it's just this vague blast of, it became pagan and pagans came in and the church changed and everything. But they actually gave you a date that you can work with. That's kind of unusual.
Well, it can be, and pardon me, I just had something of a little interruption there, but I think it's fine. On my phone. You there?
Yeah, I'm here. Yep.
Okay, sorry about that. But anyhow, yeah, I'm really thankful, frankly, that they specified a date when they did. Mm-hmm. And it's only reasonable to expect that. When somebody makes a charge, you expect the charge to be buttressed with evidence.
Yeah.
Even if it be spurious evidence, which of course it is, but at least it's an attempt at evidence.
Yeah.
And at least to their credit, some of these people actually made an attempt to validate their claim. Now, it so happens that the claim falls flat at first glance when one looks into the historical evidence. And that's why I remarked in my prolegomena to my book, which perhaps I could have and should have called Introduction, but I chose prolegomenon because it's really a formal, substantive introduction. Mm-hmm. But I remarked that there seems to me to be an effort to suppress and to ignore, certainly, if not suppress, early Christian history in many communities and in many groups and denominations, because when one looks at the history of the church, one sees immediately, at least if one looks at the apostolic writings onward, that this narrative and this charge of the Catholic Church being some chimera of paganism and a faux Christian theology is built and woven out of whole cloth. What it is an anti-Catholic myth, and it was devised specifically and deliberately to discredit the Catholic Church. The problem is, when you're dealing with a 2,000-year-old plus institution, it holds the cards in its hands. We have the documentation that we've always had from the beginning, because it was the Catholic Church, among other things, as you know, that compiled the Bible. It was the Catholic Church that said the so-called Gospel of Peter isn't biblical, but the first and second epistles of Peter are canonical and biblical. And so on.
Yeah.
And so the documentation and the history belie and refute this anti-Catholic narrative.
Yes. Yeah. Was it John Henry Carl Newman said to go deep in history is to cease to be Protestant?
Absolutely. And when he said that, he was living in 19th century England, which by necessity was a hotbed of anti-Catholicism.
Yeah.
And to be Catholic, let alone to convert to the Catholic Church, was essentially to render oneself persona non grata and suspicious and an outcast. And that's, of course, exactly what happened to the great John Henry Newman. As respected as he had been, and as great and estimable and impressive as his achievements were as an Oxonian scholar, and all the rest of it, surrounding himself with other Oxonian scholars in the Oxford movement, all of that seemingly counted for nothing when he became a Catholic himself. And he did so at great personal cost, consciously and freely. And he did it for one reason only, for the love of truth, and that his conscience, at long last, was convinced of the truth that Jesus Christ himself founded the Catholic Church. And, you know, when I look back in considering the figure of Newman, I had to wonder, how do these people not know this? I mean,
yeah,
we know that the Anglican Church was brought into existence by King Henry VIII in 1534, when he abdicated and rejected, I shouldn't say abdicated, but when he rejected the papacy and refused to subordinate himself to it and to the Catholic Church at large. This is a historical fact, and I used to wonder to myself, how could it be that a man of such towering intellect and great erudition and scholarship and renown, how could he not have known this? And then I was explained by a very erudite priest friend of mine that in the 19th century, many of the Church Fathers' writings had yet to be discovered. They had, or recently discovered in the 19th century, I should say. Up to that point, a lot of them were still not in the public's possession. So, and Newman undertook to study those newly discovered writings, as well as the extant writings that they had previously. And he concluded, after that prolonged and intensive research and reflection, that indeed the Anglican Church was not in continuity with the early church, much as they tried to claim contrary.
Yes. Yeah, not only that, but also even English translations that were done by Anglicans. I don't know if you're familiar with the author Luke Rivington, who wrote around the turn of the century, but he was an Anglican.
I've heard the name.
Yeah, he became Catholic, and part of his conversion was he was, I think he was going through some sermons of Chrysostom, and noticed that the English translation, the Anglican translations, kind of covered over the Catholic stuff, kind of smoothed the edge. So Chrysostom didn't seem like a papist. And once he realized that, he started looking into it, and it's kind of like pulling a thread on a sweater. It just fell apart.
Indeed. And of course, there had been a church in England for centuries prior to Cranmer and all the rest of them, and Henry VIII. And it's just as there's been a Church of Scotland for centuries prior to the Presbyterian movement. And I have said to dear friends of mine, just the very fact of a movement being called the Church of England or the Church of Scotland, or you name it, in and of itself would be sufficient for me to run far and fast away from it. Because there's been one church from the beginning. And the reason that the Catholic Church is so named is because very early groups and individuals came along who said, well, we're part of the church, but we reject this or that doctrine, but we're still within the communion of the one church. And so the church had to devise a term by which it would be recognized as distinct from these various movements. Yeah. And it's taken from Acts 9:31, directly from Scripture. The phrase in Greek is ecclesia kata holes, the church according to the whole. So when people say, well, where did the term Catholic Church come up? I've never seen that in the Bible. The answer is, well, because you're not reading it in Greek, you're reading it in English. And it's there in Acts 9:31. And the history of surnames, which goes back to the late medieval period, is very much consonant with that. Before, people were known, and we see this even in the New Testament, as, say, Simon Bar Jonah, Simon, son of Jonah.
Right.
And so over time, that phraseology took on the character of a proper name. Right. And the same thing happened with the proper name Catholic Church. In Greek, the phrase there, the church according to the whole, Acts 9:31, ecclesia kata holes, became the Catholic Church.
Right. Yeah, very good.
And by 325.
Bryan, we're running out of time. I just want to thank you for coming on the show. It's great to finally make your acquaintance.
Well, it's been a great pleasure and an honor, Gary. I very much appreciate your extending me this opportunity, and it's been a pleasure for me as well.
All right. Well, thank you. And the book is called Power to Become Children of God. It's available on Amazon, everybody. Grab it. It's a great resource. Lots of good information. And also, if you live in Southern California, remember, mark your calendars. February 20th, the dojo is coming out to Covina. Talk about breaking the Bible barrier, why Catholic appeals to the Bible fail, and how to make them successful. Right, coming up on tomorrow's show, give you a little tease for that. Paul Thomas comes to the dojo, and we're going to talk about apologetics, Eastern Rite style. Always fun to have Paul in the studio. And also another return guest, Dr. Douglas Beaumont, will be coming on to talk about faith alone. And you're familiar with him with his book, Evangelical Exodus. Coming up next, The Terry and Jesse Show, High Impact Catholicism at its best. Time to turn off the lights here. Thank you so much for listening to Hands On Apologetics.
In the 1990s, I lived and worked in Hollywood. But when my wife Betty's mom took ill, we relocated to Orange County. And it was during this time in our lives that I converted to Catholicism. Once my eyes were opened to the truth, I couldn't learn enough about the faith. But I had less free time than ever, especially with a long commute. That's when I discovered the real value of Catholic audio. Listening to cassette tapes transformed my daily commute into a miniature retreat. And that's the beauty of Virgin Most Powerful Radio today. Since the podcasts are archived, you can listen anytime on our smartphone app. I know how listening to Catholic audio can bring you closer to Christ and His Church. So I encourage you to visit the App Store or go to vmpr.org and download the app today. It just might change your life. I'm Matthew Arnold for Virgin Most Powerful Radio.